There are two major misconceptions about how the federal tax system affects your income. The first thing we're going to do is clear those up, because especially when you're talking about family taxes or the middle class or low income earners, you can be tricked into thinking that a tax policy is going to have a dramatic impact on your taxes, when in truth, it's going to have very little. The first major misconception is believing that changes to the federal tax code will have an impact on all of the federal taxes that you pay, when in truth you pay two different types of federal taxes. There's payroll tax and income tax. And payroll tax, commonly referred to as FICA taxes, which is just an acronym, is used for things like Social Security and Medicare. And in general, we all pay the same amount, which is about 8.5%. And it is not affected by things like deductions or tax credits or virtually anything we're going to talk about in this video. Income tax, on the other hand, is affected by it, and that'll make much more sense in just a minute when we do an example. But the second major misconception is understanding exactly how deductions and tax credits affects income taxes. So imagine someone earns $50,000 a year. They're going to pay about 8.5% in payroll taxes. We'll use simple math and say that's about $4,000. Then they're also going to go, income tax. But they'll have deductions which will reduce the amount of their income that is taxable. In general, the middle class and low earners is just going to use the standard deduction of about $15,000. So their $50,000 becomes $35,000 in taxable income. That will put them around the 10% tax bracket. That's going to make the math easy and is an estimate, but it's not that far off. So they're going to end up paying about $3,500 in taxes. And then they'll apply tax credits, which directly reduces what they owe as taxes instead of reducing what is taxable. So if they have a child, they might be eligible for something like a $2,000 child tax credit. Their $3,500 becomes $1,500 in taxes owed. So they earn $50,000 in income, but they only pay $1,500 in income tax and $4,000 of payroll tax. You can see how you could be confused of thinking, I earn $50,000, I'm in the 10% tax bracket, and thus I owe about $5,000 in taxes. It all makes sense. But $4,000 of that is payroll tax, which is not affected by the things we're talking about. Only $1,500 of it is income tax. All right, let's jump into the policies. When we're talking about taxes on families, we're typically talking about the child tax credit, which is an amount of money you don't have to pay in taxes based on the number of kids you have. Right now, it's about $2,000. If you have two kids, you owe $4,000 less on your taxes. In order to understand the difference between the two candidates and why this is so important in the way you change the policy in terms of what outcome you want, let's go ahead and look at this article here from the Wall Street Journal. More cash for kids is popular. It might not be wise. Spoiler alert. So it started back in 1997. $400 per child. Over the kind of years after that, it changed to $500, eventually to $1,000. And then in 2017, when Trump did his major tax overhaul, he changed that to $2,000 per child, but he also raised the phase-out limit. So that's the income limit upon which you're eligible for it or not eligible for it. So he made, people receiving more income eligible for it, which was tied into a lot of changes. So sometimes this can be a little critical if you don't understand this tax overhaul in its entirety, but we're just doing this on the child tax credit. This is a kind of picture of how it has changed. Now, this is the cost of the federal child tax credits through this time started back here. You can see the dramatic change here in Trump, and then we're going to talk about this, which is very important in a minute. But you can see right here when the child tax credit started to become, some portion of it became refundable. And what's important about how much of it is refundable, and to explain what refundable is that imagine from our example, our person that owed $3,500 in income tax, they had one kid, so they got $2,000 off their taxes. What if they had two kids and they got $4,000 off their taxes? Well, that's more than they owed. If it's refundable, they would literally get a check back from the government for the other $500, kind of as a kind of stimulus or help to them. And it's not all refundable, so you can imagine kind of in the current rules, they might get like 50% of it back, so they might get $250 back. And you can see just before the Trump changes that about 50% of the child tax credit was going to people who were receiving it as a refundable benefit, Whereas after the Trump change, because he increased the cap on the income upon which you are eligible for it, only about a third of it, even almost as much as 25% to a third of it is going to people who are receiving that as refundable. So that was kind of a dramatic change. Now, this doesn't mean that, a lot of these folks that are not receiving it as refundable are still middle class and it's having a dramatic impact, but we do see some families that might not necessarily need it be receiving it. All right, in 2021, we see this dramatic impact. This is, of course, Biden's first year in office. COVID is going on, and this was part of his stimulus package for COVID. He changed the child tax credit to $3,600 for younger kids, $3,000 for older kids. He made it fully refundable. This was a lot of the money that people received throughout the year because he actually ended up, instead of doing it at tax time, he paid it out throughout the year. There was a lot of studies done on this because the child tax credit changed dramatically, and they found that this had a very big impact on child poverty for the many families who were already receiving it as refundable, and now they're getting substantially more, right? You have 3 kids and you go from it being $6,000 and only some of it's refundable to it being $9,000 and it's all refundable. It was a pretty dramatic impact. Now, in recent years, it's gone back to the way that Trump has changed, because Biden did not change anything to the child tax credit. So Harris wants to change it to the way that Biden had it for this 1 year, $3,600 and $3,000 based on the age of the child, and $6,000 for the child's first year of life and fully refundable. And I'm sure she will change the income limit, most likely down. What does Trump want to do? He probably wants to keep it the way that he did. This is not necessarily what he wants to do in the future because he already kind of did it in his first term. It's important to note that a lot of these Trump tax changes from 2017 are sunsetting in 2025, and both parties want to keep a lot of what was changed during that time. They just argue about what they don't want, to keep along those times. So to wrap up here quick on the child tax credit, there's 3 ways you can change it, and it affects 3 different groups. If you increase the amount of it, $1,000 to $2,000, $2,000 to $3,000, that largely helps wealthy families because they pay enough on their taxes that they actually get all of the tax credit, whereas low-income earners generally aren't going to be paying enough on taxes if you dramatically increase the amount of it. That needs to be refundable, which is the second way. So if you make more or less of it refundable, that largely impacts low-income earners because they don't pay enough in taxes in order to take full advantage of the credit. So they need more of it is refundable to be able to get more money out of the system for it. Certainly also helps, kind of lower middle class or kind of in a similar situation. The other way is changing the level upon which you're eligible for it, the income limit. This largely helps the middle class. Obviously, if you lower the eligibility and are all of a sudden not eligible for it, that, dramatically hurts you. But it decreases the cost of the program, and you can kind of fine tune it to where you kind of perceive the public needs help from it. You can see the child tax credit is pretty complicated, and the way you think it should be changed probably is determined by which of these groups you fall into. I think when it comes to the standpoint of this series, I want to address the fact that it often comes off that I am entirely against tax cuts for the wealthy, which is probably not accurate. For me, it's more important to look at what is the purpose of the tax policy. And the purpose of the child tax credit is to reduce the financial burden of raising kids. And it's really hard for me to argue that if you have $400,000 in income, that a $6,000 tax credit is somehow going to reduce the burden of you raising kids, whereas low income and middle class families really do need that help. So, if we had a tax policy that was intended to reduce the tax burden on wealthy individuals for whatever reason, why would we only give it to the ones who have kids, right? That's what we would be doing if we raised the child tax credit or made it more advantageous for wealthy individuals. We would only be doing it for wealthy individuals with kids, which doesn't make any sense. So for me, a lot of this about whether we should be taxing the wealthy or the low income comes into what is the purpose of the tax policy. If you're interested in the rest of this series, here's the next video. It's a series about the 2 different candidates, different tax policy approaches coming into the election. Stick around the channel for similar content, and I will talk to you soon.